Hello and welcome to our roundtable debate. Today we'll be discussing the following topics: the Cold War, and the Dante policy, which Richard Nixon, General Ford, and Jimmy Carter used to ease rough political relations between us and the Soviet Union. We will also be discussing the 52 Americans who were held hostage in Iran by on November 4th. We will also be discussing the current economic crisis. We will also be discussing the grain embargo and our involvement in Lebanon. Here to discuss the following topics, we have our Democratic representatives and our Republican representatives. And we'll start with our Democratic representatives on how do you guys feel about the detente policy?
Well, this policy we feel could be very beneficial to our government and staying connected to other countries and hearing everyone's word out and trying to find a common boundary or common place where we can both come to an agreement. So.
Well, the thing I see about the issue with the detente policy is that fact that we're letting communism spread to other countries, where the whole goal of the United States is to spread democracy and not to let communism overrule the world, where that is detrimental to our way of life.
Well, while the detente policy is easing of the strained relations, it is not a fix or it's not a removing of the hostility between the countries. It's a period of improved relations between the major powers of the Cold War, leading to less direct hostility and more communication.
Well, so far we've seen things that where the Soviet Union has been able to spread their communism. So I don't know how that would happen, or how we're improving our relations if we spread if they've been able to spread their communism.
But we're hoping that the relations with the Soviet Union can be improved, and although the spread of communism is a really big issue right now, we're trying to focus on the communication and getting the agreement down, and first focusing on that, and maybe the communism spreading could be contained after we get our relationship under control first.
It seems like the policy favors the Soviet Union, that all the concessions are going their way, and it doesn't seem to be a fair deal for the United States.
Well, right now the Soviet Union is the main focus on America right now. There are other places that could be using this policy as well, which would probably happen in the near future, but right now Soviet Union is our main focus at the moment.
So starting with our Republican representatives, what are your guys' views on the Iranian hostage crisis?
Well, we feel it's totally wrong of the Iranians to allow their people to storm the U.S. Embassy and to take our people as hostage.
Well, since the beginning of the Cold War, the United States supported any regime that was not communist, no matter how unpopular they were with the people of their country. Iran was not a communist country. However, the people did not support the Shah. He did treat the people badly. However, it was not a communist, and the Democratic Party, we wanted to stay out of as much as possible, stay out of other countries' affairs.
Well, right now we're in this affair because they have our civilians that were working at the embassy, and now they're hostages, and they've been hostages for over a month now. And this is kind of ridiculous because we're not setting any precedent that we should be involved. Whereas Carter has sent has done operations that have failed multiple times. I think we should just go in, send military forces, and take our hostages back, whether it starts a fight or not, and save those hostages, because they're civilians, they're people who have human rights, and they're people from our country, which is most important.
Well, I think that's what he's most afraid of, is people dying, and he's trying to get this done the safest way that he thinks is possible, and which is the problem with going in with military force, is that there could be a lot of casualties, and maybe a lot more than he thinks could be without the policies that he's trying to put in action.
Well, the issue I see with your plan is that if we do military operations and it fails, and if the Shah finds out that we've done these military operations, he will start a war with us. This this is a simple way of how we should approach this now, and I think you guys are wrong in your approach.
Well, our approach, we did try to send communication to the Ayatollah community before the rescue mission even took place. However, the Ayatollah community refused to let the hostages free. So we did send over troops. However, it was not our fault that the mission failed. There was mechanical difficulty with the helicopters. We had Mother Nature, the storm that caused the 2 helicopters to crash. So that was not the Democratic Party's fault for the failed mission. And on another point, I would say that the Iranians did not like Carter, our President Carter, because he supported the Shah. So that's another reason why they would not release the hostages.
Well, Reagan does not support the Shah, and the Iranian government did not start this crisis, but they do have the control, and they are not releasing our hostages.
So we are currently in the longest economic crisis with inflation and rising energy prices, with an average unemployment rate of 9%. And starting with our Democratic representatives, what do you guys believe we should do about this current crisis?
Well, Carter, we have to remember that Carter came into the presidency while the economy was already down because of Ford. And in a recent debate, he argued that his proposal was a very carefully considered to stimulate jobs, to improve the industrial complex for this country, to create tools for American workers, and at the same time, it would be anti-inflationary in nature. And so doing this, he would have maybe around 9 million new jobs to control that inflation, and also having a plan for the future for like some type of energy policy for our country.
We want to lower taxes, because by lowering taxes, we will be able to create more jobs, and the unemployment rate will go down in effect. And this will allow private investors to come in and invest, and will help lift us out of our recession.
As previously stated, while Carter cannot be blamed for the double-digit inflation that peaked on his watch, inflation began growing in 1965. And to battle this inflation, Carter plans to appoint Paul Volcker, who is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. And his plan is to start an intentional recession in order that interest rates could be cut, and then this will flood the economy with money, hopefully fueling an expansion that will last many years to come.
Well, you said that Carter's not to blame, but he hasn't had any specific plans or his plans have not been successful through his presidency. Now, Reagan, through his governorship, has proven that while California has had its crisis as well, that we've cut national average spending and inflation in California. Now, this is like a proven plan. All your plans are hypothetical. So how do we plan to have that work while we have our plan that has worked, which will work for our country?
Well, again, you have to remember that California is one state, and the president is responsible for 50 other states, which is a really tough job. And although his policies may not work, you learn from lessons, and this is definitely a lesson learned for Carter. And I think his next plan will definitely work in the future.
So this 1979 grain embargo policy, which has been enacted by the Carter administration, basically to punish the Soviet Union for invading Afghanistan. So we're going to start with our Republicans this time. And what are your guys' view on this grain embargo policy?
Well, first of all, this policy is hurting our farmers due to a decrease in export, and the embargo is pretty much useless because it's hurting the Soviet Union's purchasing grain anyway from South America and Europe.
Well, I wouldn't call it useless, and yes, our farmers here in the United States are suffering, but we had to respond to the invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. And yes, they've acquired grain from alternative sources. However, we had to take a stand against the invasion.
Well, the fact of the matter is that our contract canceled 17 million metric tons of just U.S. corn, wheat, and soybeans, and Carter has undermined the effectiveness of this embargo by himself. And it's also allowed that another 8 million metric tons of U.S. grain has gone, and he let this go to the Soviet Union anyway. So how has this grain embargo been effective if he still allows grain to be procured to the Soviet Union?
Well, we did feel obligated to give the Soviet Union their grain because it was under agreement, and this we're just staying true to our word. But this whole thing is about taking a stand against what they did and punishing them for what they did, and kind of letting them know that they can't just do things without consequences.
Well, the fact is that the flip flop on the promise to embargo this grain on the grain embargo is stemming from the realization that we all feel that the regime in Moscow is vulnerable and that we're actually more powerful in this situation, but we haven't taken advantage of our power just through a simple measly grain embargo that's not only hurting our country but useless.
So, with our current involvement in Lebanon following the worst fighting of the 1975 Civil War, the United States has become politically involved in seeking to bolster the presidency of Amin Gemayel and broker a treaty between Lebanon and Israel. So, starting with our Democratic representatives, how do you guys feel about our involvement in Lebanon?
Well, first, we're there because we're trying to relieve the suffering in Lebanon. We're trying to strengthen the government against rebellious factors, to support the Lebanese president against other political military leaders, to broker a deal among the foreign powers active in Lebanon, to convene a conference of the Lebanon factors, and lastly, to foster a new charter, which is referring to the reappointment of political power to reflect against the demographic changes in the religious balance. And by doing this, we would just be staying in our political influence. We don't want to go any further than that, just to stay with our detente policy.
Well, we need to send our troops in. We need to send peacekeeping troops in so that we can become more involved and start implementing negotiations.
However, we shouldn't fuel the already existing conflict. We believe in the rule of law in international affairs and in principle of self-determination for all people. We want the United States to take the lead in promoting universal human rights. And we believe that American power should be exercised sparingly and that the United States should avoid military interventions as much as possible.
Well, the only issue with that is that there is already a big militaristic influence in this region of the world, and we need to provide our great military influence and to end this, because anyone that sees that the United States comes into this militaristic influence, they will end their civil war just because we have a presence there. Right now, we only have a weak political presence, and no one's really willing to listen because they already have their arms and we have nothing there. And that's all I have to say.
So this concludes our roundtable debate. Thank you, Democrats. Thank you, Republicans.